Well, welcome everybody to this ESRC funded series of the Enterprising Impact Conversations. I'm Debbie Keeling. I'm the Deputy Pro-Vice Chancellor of Knowledge Exchange at the University of Sussex, and I'm also the Director of the ESRC Impact Acceleration Account at Sussex. A little housekeeping for you. We are recording the session. But also, we do like to see faces. So if you like to keep your video on, please feel free to do so. The inspiration for this series came from lots of different sources, and many of you are working in higher education or are working with higher education partners, and you'll know that the landscape is really changing. Right the way from the greater emphasis on impact in the Research Excellence Framework, the Declaration on Research Assessment, also known as DORA, which really encourages us to look at a much wider portfolio of outcomes and values from our research. Of course, the increasing emphasis on higher education's role in achieving the UN Sustainable Development Goals. And there's also a lot of conversations, discussions amongst funders around how we can fund more and more enterprise commercializations type activities. And of course, the knowledge exchange framework, which is a kind of the new kid on the block there, which is really looking at how knowledge exchange can really help us to engage with different sorts of enterprise to really help us to boost the value of what we do. And from all of those different sources, all of those different conversations, what we get is a real sense that this world of enterprise holds a lot of opportunities for social science in realizing the social value and the impact of what we do. And this conversation is really to look at that journey from this initial session, which is all about getting an overview of and understanding researchers' experiences, right the way through to practical steps. And you can see there that that's captured in the aims of the series. We want to have a conversation around how we can use knowledge exchange enterprise approaches to really develop that greater social value from your research, but also thinking about building your career and building that wider portfolio. And very practically, we will be connecting you throughout the series with specialist advisors and identifying practical steps. What can you actually do? And you'll see there, which we can also put in the chat, a link to the full series. I also should mention that although we've said that this is for social science researchers, professional services teams at the Universities of Sussex, Bristol, Cardiff, Exeter, York and Surrey, it is of course open to anybody who really would want to attend and learn more and take part in the conversation, more importantly. So this first series, the first in the series is about engaging knowledge exchange partners to create that research impact, why and how. And we have 4 excellent speakers for you, which I'll introduce later on, but just to give you an idea of what they're talking about, we have Kristine Hickle, who's a senior lecturer in social work and social care. And Kristine's going to be talking about all around creative knowledge exchange. And Professor John Drury, who's Professor of Social Psychology and also the Director of Research and Knowledge Exchange in the School of Psychology here at Sussex, will be talking about engaging with government. Dr. Maya Golf-Papes, who's a lecturer in marketing in the University of Sussex Business School, is intriguingly going to be talking about serendipity and perils. I'm not going to say any more, Maya. I'm going to leave it all up to you. And Saskia Gent, from Director of Insights for Impact, is going to be talking about those commercial routes to achieving impact. Now, today is to give you that overview, to help you to really understand some very different experiences from researchers in different fields. And so what we've done is we've asked all of our speakers to explore these particular or reflect on these particular questions around the value of knowledge exchange to them, what it looks like to them, how they've gone about knowledge exchange, and what's been achieved, particularly through commercial work. Now, when we talk about commercial work in social sciences, we're actually talking about a very broad definition of commercial work, and it's not necessarily around revenue generation, it's really about value generation. So we're really going to have a look at this from a researcher's eye view. But we also very much want to hear from you as well. This is a conversation. So please feel free to introduce yourselves in the chat, offer comments as the speakers are explaining and reflecting on their experiences, and pose questions. And we're going to have a panel session at the end where we'll be able to discuss and explore those issues that you've raised in the chat, or that appear to you from as they're going along. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and I'm going to hand over to the first speaker, who is Kristine Hickle, to share her experiences. Kristine, over to you.
All right, so I'm going to talk particularly a little bit about my own experience, but sort of kind of reflect on my experience of being the academic lead for Impact Knowledge Exchange in the School of Education and Social Work, and kind of start and sort of tell a little bit of a story about sort of, I think, how our understanding of Impact Knowledge Exchange has evolved in quite a nice and an exciting way. So I'm going to start with sort of thinking about kind of post-ref objectives. Obviously, so much of the emphasis on impact pre-ref was case studies, was kind of tightening that, making sure that we had what we needed. And after the ref, some of those kind of pressures aside, and an awareness of the KEF, we knew we kind of wanted to proactively start planning to support colleagues to continue holding on to and sort of growing their understanding of impact, and the related concept of knowledge exchange, which is how we obviously explained it, just the pathways we take to create an evidence impact. And helpfully includes kind of, I think, wonderfully creative and generative knowledge that's being developed by colleagues on teaching and scholarship contracts, as well as research. So we spent some time really thinking about what colleagues in our school need, and how to continue fostering a research culture that we said we had, or were aiming to achieve in our environment statement, and kind of tentatively began testing out discussions of KEF metrics with colleagues, thinking about using language that's really mindful, I guess, of using language that is not particularly welcome in schools like ours, things like commercialization and other sort of income-driven metrics. We're a school that does, our research is by and large entirely about a kind of social justice, about education and safeguarding work for vulnerable people. What would that look like? How do we even kind of have these conversations? How do we make it useful for us? So I like a challenge. I'm a social worker that does a lot of research with police, which is in and of itself challenging. So I really felt like the work that we do in our school does have value beyond the capacity that sometimes we can currently imagine for ourselves. And so I think that's kind of what I want to talk to and kind of share today in my 10 minutes. I'm just going to go to the next slide if I can remember how to do that. There we go. All right, so that's not the right slide. There we go. The image that I felt like I needed to share here was a kind of square peg in a round hole, because I think sometimes, again, like I said, our values and sort of thinking about impact and knowledge exchange don't feel like an automatic fit sometimes, and for some people. So we started with a useful exercise with a lovely consultant, Saskia, who's you'll hear from later, where Saskia sort of helped us to surface our kind of values, the value base for our research, and the values we wanted to in particular guide our post-ref impact and knowledge exchange thinking and planning. So we wanted to be able to say to ourselves and to our colleagues that the value that we hold as researchers isn't incompatible with KEF metrics, including commercialization. And sort of starting from that value base allows us to then intentionally make decisions about what commercializing our research might look like, and then also push back against things where we say, actually, no, we're not doing that at all. That doesn't align with our value base. That's not who we are individually, or it's a kind of in a school culture, but there are elements that is true and that is for us. And that it's in many ways up to us to decide how to shape knowledge exchange and impact activities so that it feels like a natural fit and like just a kind of natural direction of travel, ensuring that our work has the greatest benefit for the most people. So I'm going to give a couple of examples of sort of what this has looked like for us in the last year. And whilst none are at least the examples I'll share here aren't like they've not made the evening news. I think you might hear a little bit more about that later. But they represent examples of how colleagues at different career stages have made use of, I think, our support within the school, within the IAA fund, and the HIFE funds, essentially from the university, and have made use of our professional services lead, which is a senior research officer, kind of has impact and knowledge exchange in her remit, with myself as impact and knowledge exchange academic lead, and our directors of research and knowledge exchange. So take the ideas that they had and expand them, make them more accessible, and allow them to kind of do the things they wanted to do. So we saw people kind of access sort of ring fence funds we had within the school to do things like creating sort of whiteboard animations. We had several people do that, and easily accessible. It was both a good exercise in actually helping them to develop a way of talking about their research in accessible ways. So just doing that made them use language that they could share, and also have a kind of useful product that we could all work together to share widely on social media platforms. And in particular, we had kind of people in early career stages and in and research fellows take this up as well, which was really useful to see them kind of taking doctoral research right after they finished it, and that we could support them to put something together. We saw colleagues do things like develop their websites. So they had project websites. One in particular, the case of Rebecca Webb and Perpetua Kirby's work, which is the sort of screenshot of their websites on the left side of the screen there, Transform in Education. They used kind of subsequent, after several years, small pots of funding to keep progressing their work, to move it in different directions. And most recently, they used funds to evaluate the usefulness of resources to educators in several different countries. So they kind of they redid their website to make it more accessible. They developed new resources, and then they kind of piloted it to see what that would look like for people outside the UK. The work, I think, here, and then also we've all used by kind of sharing resources within the school, contact details of artists, people who have done kind of graphics work, created posters, infographics, other things. That's, I think, allowed us to sort of really see impact and knowledge exchange work that's generative, that's interesting, that's exciting, and it has even the examples represented here on the screen have led to some new research partnerships, allowed, again, early career researchers to develop their skills and accessible resources from their work. So it's a kind of practice skill that for them to develop early on is quite useful and important. And it's been a really flexible way to engage with non-academic partners when oftentimes, particularly in education and social work, this isn't always the case, but maybe I'm just speaking from experience, the funding for something bigger and better and grander isn't there, but the ideas and the potential for future funding are. So we're able to still say, yes, we can do something with you. Let's think about what we can do with this idea, with the findings from this small research project or consultancy project. And then that will allow us, what we develop from that will move us on to the next stage. I'm going to share another really great example of this that came from my colleague Emily, who said gave me permission to share this here. So she accessed some of our internally kind of ring-fence funds for knowledge exchange last year. We approached her, myself and my professional services colleague Deeptima, and kind of encouraged her to develop her work during the pandemic that was related to accessing higher education for Gypsy, Roma, and traveler people. And so then they worked with Saskia, our external consultant, to kind of consolidate their ideas, to think about a sort of intentional, useful way forward that would be the best use of their time and resources. And you can see here that it's kind of the screenshot on the bottom of the screen there is the website they developed that has both a kind of commercial commercial offer for training and consultancy work around this, because they kept realizing that people wanted something from them that they saw particular value. They just didn't have a way of packaging it or framing it. And then I've got a lovely kind of quote from her that she just, that she sent us afterwards, saying that, the meeting with Saskia, I don't know if you've heard this, Saskia, so here you go, lovely feedback for you. Want to see how much I valued it, and the opportunity to use the CAF funding, the money and support gave me the confidence to do things like a news article and a policy brief that I'd never had done before. And it's been hugely valuable for my own development and my research. And I think for me, that feels like one of the most interesting things about kind of promoting knowledge exchange in the school is that It's finding ways for the kind of direction of travel that people want to go. Emily wanted to do something with this work, but simply kind of academic outputs wasn't necessarily going to get her what she wanted, but also a piecemeal approach to training and to just responding to offers from people outside, from non-academic partners, also isn't always the best way to go. And that's something I learned in particular in my own work. So I'll kind of end with an example from my research. I think benefited quite a lot from the last several years supporting other colleagues, and then sometimes feeling compelled to practice what I preach a bit when I'm not doing the things that I hope that they do well for themselves. So my research is all kind of practice near, working alongside professionals in local authority children's services, in national charities and the police. Most recently, this work's kind of focused on supporting organizations to become more trauma informed in their policies and practices. Now, over time, and because I'm a social worker who both wants to help, but also has notoriously poor boundaries around my time, and I have a hard time saying no when someone asks, can you please come train on this? Can you please come do that? I've said yes to too many training and consultancy projects, and had a hard time then holding on to the value of that, what that's led to. It's been beneficial in some ways, but it's increasingly not been a good use of my time and resources. So watching what other people have done, even having conversations with Saskia myself, has sort of changed my way of thinking, and particularly around commercializing research that really has a distinct focus on social justice. So the work I'm doing, helping organizations to become more trauma informed, isn't something that I intend to make loads of money off of, but is something that organizations have ring-fenced budgets for. They want to use their training funds for. They want to do something with. Oftentimes, March comes around and they're desperate to get rid of a tiny pocket of money to develop a resource. They need this content, and they will ask for it. So what I kind of have started doing much better is to say no initially to training and consultancy offers until I have further conversations about the organization's overall strategy, of suggesting sometimes other avenues of engagement, and then bringing in other researchers, bringing in research fellows or colleagues that within the school, within our pool of researchers who could both use the work, but are also really skilled or might be able to further develop their skills, to partner with me in this. And then also to think about building right from the outset, ways of evidencing the change, particularly in an area like trauma-informed practice where change is incremental and notoriously difficult to measure anyway. So we're not going to see huge things happening differently. Oftentimes we'll see bad things, right? All of a sudden a police force realizes they're all traumatized, and then there's a huge increase in need, right? So how do we kind of do that and frame it the right way? But I've started doing things again, like suggesting certain kinds of products. Sometimes it's just been an infographic. It's been, they don't have a budget for a big research project, but I've consulted. We've developed some resources. I've connected them to other colleagues, and I've been much more strategic about thinking, how am I going to use this then to justify another funding bid? How am I going to use this to connect with other colleagues that I want to work with? They're both academic and non-academic. And that I'm thinking about that much more now at the beginning, which again is something I think we said to other people way before I did myself, so that I have a kind of really clear plan for what this looks like. And also I feel really comfortable when I'm suggesting costs, when I'm suggesting a training package that has any cost associated with it all, that this is a package that that sits well with my value base, but also is a better use of my time and resources. So I think I actually haven't kept a good track of time. I might have talked quite fast, but I'm going to end there.
Thanks so much, Kristine. So we're going to hand over to John, and just while John's loading up his slides, what really struck me from what you were saying, Kristine, was how you've really used a combination of all sorts of different knowledge exchange strategies to build a very substantial portfolio that has this ongoing conversation and responding to need over time. And I think that's a great takeaway from what you've done. And thank you very much for that. If you do think of questions for Kristine, there will be an opportunity later. And do put them in the chat, and we'll keep an eye on the chat. So I'm very pleased to hand over to John. And take it away, John.
Okay, yeah. Thanks very much, Debbie. So I want to tell you about the sort of knowledge exchange journey that I've been on in the last 20 years. And in order to do that, I need to tell you a bit about the research that forms the kind of centerpiece of much of the knowledge exchange that I do. it started off with work on how the public behave in mass emergencies. And one of the things we were interested in was the way that relationships change amongst people caught up in emergencies like the one you can see on the screen here, which is the London bombings of 2005. And in the inset there, you can see some of the comments from people we interviewed at this terrorist attack, where, if you remember, over 50 people died. Yet in the immediate aftermath, those trying to evacuate the tunnel and doing so themselves because the emergency services weren't able to get to them at first, the way their relationship changed from seeing each other simply as other commuters who are maybe in my way and I have no connection with, to seeing them as part of an extended sense of self. So they talked about a sense of unity and togetherness, teamness, warmness, solidarity, and so on. And we investigated this phenomena through a series of different kinds of studies, not only interviews, but also experiments. And this work and other studies of emergencies and disasters that we carried out over the years produced a model that looks a bit like this, whereby the emergency can change people's relationships with each other so that they share a social identity. And this is the basis of a whole series of adaptive consequences, such as helping and the ability to coordinate. Now, what was important about this was not only the kind of academic side, but the relevance of it for professionals and organizations that work in the field of emergency response and crowd safety management more broadly. I mean, when I started doing this, and the others, the team I was with, we didn't really think about knowledge exchange in those days. We were purely focused on academic theory, just that kind of concern, not really thinking about external partners and so on. But it soon became clear that these findings, this model, if you like, was highly relevant and highly of interest to others outside of academia. And so in order to connect with that, one of the first things we did at the end of the project was to produce an accessible summary, a little booklet of the research findings and the literature of the review. And the reason for doing this was, although of course, all academics have loads of academic outputs in the form of journal articles, those are not really written for an audience outside of academia. They're the language, the concepts, the assumptions, are all written for our academic in-group. And so therefore we needed to change that language and adapt it to a form that was meaningful to people outside of academia. Now, all we did was mail, this was in the days before PDFs really, we just created literally a pamphlet and posted it to various organizations where emergency services, crowd safety managers, resilience managers, and so on, all around the country. And some of them started responding, and some of them started inviting us. So that's basic dissemination, like a one-way conversation, if you like. But it enabled something more, something different in terms of conversation. It led to invitations to speak at conferences run by various stakeholders. Now, the importance of that was by attending these conferences, what happens at conferences? It's a great networking opportunity, right? So dialogue was enabled, dialogue began with all sorts of different groups. And I'd say the stakeholders for this work fall into three categories. And Debbie said government, but actually I work with a broader range of end users than government. Government are one of them, certainly government departments like the Civil Contingency Secretariat. So this is the government department, part of the Cabinet Office that make plans around emergencies, and they need to know how the public behave. In fact, I have I do a lot of work with them, but it's not the kind of commercial side. If you're talking about the kind of commercial side, like where we might get consultancy income from, it's not them. It tends to be the small businesses, SMEs, which stands for small and medium enterprises. These are businesses that manage crowd safety at live events. Now, Britain actually kind of leads the way in terms of kind of turning the work they do into a science. So they're quite thirsty, quite hungry for knowledge. So that's the second one. So they tend to be private sector, but also the emergency services. So at the operational end, the ambulance service and particularly the fire service have been another interested partner. So what is the form of the engagement? So jumping ahead to how this kind of translates into a usable thing for these stakeholders. What is it? What can we give them? Well, for these markets or these end users, there are two kinds of things that they want from us. One is training. So they want some form of training. They want this academic output, this academic knowledge turned into a form of training that they can use, that they can embed in their training programs. But secondly, they also want material that can inform their guidance, because all of these organizations and others produce guidance for their members. And within that, if you read documents on emergency response, emergency planning, there's often psychology in there. And so it's a way of informing that and improving that. I want to give you just a little flavor of what we mean by training, because training can take the form of CPD, continued professional development. Now, the slide here is one of the slides from a CPD course, a version of a CPD course that I've run several times over the years. And I'll just tell you a little bit about how this developed. So one input into this was some IAA, ESRC IAA funding I had, which allowed me to pilot a version of this CPD course. And so it's kind of evolved over the years. And based on contacts, first of all, so based on these conversations and knowing the industry, and then within the industry, people talk to each other. And then people basically would approach me and ask me to run a CPD course. But in the very beginning, I was kind of a one-man band doing this. I remember the first one I did, I marketed it myself. I hired the rooms myself. I did the catering myself, as well as delivered the teaching. And that is actually quite an inefficient way to do things, unless you've got a big team with you. I mean, as an academic, it's not the best way to do it. The best way I discovered, and what I tend to do these days, is work with these organizations that want this CPD, and they will market it because they have all the contacts. They will book the venue, they will do the catering, they will do the marketing, and so on. So that is the way I tend to do things these days. And so then I can just focus on the kind of academic content and the design and delivery. Now you can see from this, it looks like a kind of normal academic PowerPoint, and to some extent it is. And I've really tried over the years to include more interactive content into these sessions, because as all those of us who deliver teaching, interaction, getting engagement really helps people to understand and people to learn, rather than simply, again, a kind of one-way conversation. So just a couple of examples from my slides from that CPD. Now, how this benefits the university. So in fact, consultancy money doesn't benefit the university a lot. It might benefit the individual because they can put it in their devolved code and spend it on all sorts of things. So that's good. That's not the benefit for the university. I think the main benefit for the university, or one of the benefits for universities, is impact case studies. So in the current ref and in the previous ref, I was a lead author on 2 impact case studies, which have been among those submitted by my unit of assessment, my department, for the research excellence framework. So that's one benefit for the university of this kind of knowledge exchange. The other one I'd single out is, so if you want to go for funding in the future, and if you're going for UKRI, you will know UKRI, who are the government, basically the department of all research funders. They really place a high value on relationships with end users and the usefulness of the research, not just the scientific contribution. So in the slide I'm showing you, this is a current grant, and you've got a number of non-academic partners in there. So all of these names, like Staffordshire County Council, Fire and Rescue, Make Real, they're a small business who make virtual reality, and also the Civil Contingency Secretariat, all of these partners were involved with me in a kind of co-production in the design of this grant application before it was submitted, to get their input, not only into research design, but also into outputs and deliverables, like what kind of thing are they interested in? And you're finding common ground with these different partners for a project. And that this project was funded. And I think one of the strengths of it was all these partners who are not only saying it's a valuable thing, but also giving their time because they can see it's useful. So just to finish then, where does this kind of thing go next? So one of the useful things we got from HIFE, we had some funding to help with the CPD work. And what that gave us was a market analysis of possible ways forward. And one of the things that I think would increase value for CPD work is some kind of certification, some kind of accreditation. If you look at CPDs offered by other organizations, they offer accreditation, and people can take that and it shows the value. So that will be good to be able to do that. I did want to expand the CPD into other countries. I've done Ireland and Netherlands, but I was really held up, stopped from doing this by what's been happening with COVID. And I think the other thing that would, because that not only stopped me doing things, but it also really badly affected the events industry, which wasn't able to operate and lost a lot of money. And the other thing that I think would be useful would be to turn something like this, and this relates to something Christy said, you can't say yes to everything, you haven't got enough time. So how would you max scale up? One way of scaling up is to use video recordings for training sessions rather than appear in person all the time. So sorry for overrunning, that is me, and thank you very much.
Thanks so much, John. And while we hand over to our next speaker, Maya, I was really struck, John, there by the evolution of the relationships with lots of different types of stakeholders, public and private, and the ongoing evolution that is in parallel with that of the different kind of knowledge exchange and how that developed over time. And I think that was a really fascinating journey. Thank you. Maya, the screen is yours.
Here we go. So hi everyone. To put things a little bit in the context. So I am an early researcher who finished her PhD around 3 years ago. I've escaped to academia from the practice of management consulting, thinking that I need more knowledge, but soon realizing that without action, knowledge is often meaningless. In trying to do something with the knowledge or to exchange it, as we would say here, I'm often told that considering my early career stage and the fact that I'm still on probation is just not the right time to engage in knowledge exchange activities. My focus should be on more traditional research outputs, so in publishing in high quality journals, in delivering high quality teaching, and of course also in being a great citizen and doing good academic service. But what if engaging in knowledge exchange makes me a better teacher, a better researcher, and comes with an impact on the side? So to demonstrate what I mean, I would like to show you a very short case study. So it all started with a research paper. This is paper that is co-authored with Domen Baide, Barbara Zuliberg, and Tomasz Kolar. So we were trying to explore in the context of Airbnb how the marketplaces can ensure that people act in a responsible way. So for instance, if you have an Airbnb, that people do not stain your carpet or steal your TV. So we come up with a definition with the whole kind of set of mechanisms that companies can use, anything from ratings and reviews that we all know them, but then we also have certifications, verifications, sanctions, rules, notifications, predictive analytics, a lot of different mechanisms. At that point, we had no plans or aspirations to commercialize these research projects. It was similarly, as John said before, it was more about developing and contributing to theory. While we sent the paper we submit the paper to the journal, and the paper was under the review. I worked on a healthy aging grant application, and meanwhile, I was introduced to the founder of a company, of a startup, early company, the Good Company people, who was trying to find somebody who would help them evaluate the impact of their idea on older people. So what this company is actually doing, they're trying to connect people who are prepared to give company to older people with older people who require or wish to have company. So while I couldn't really help the founder in evaluating the impact of their idea, I soon realized that our Airbnb-related paper might be applicable to a diverse set of settings and marketplaces, and that actually engaging with this startup allows us to validate our research conclusions and to validate also the business idea of offering this support and trying to help other companies who might have the similar problems of encouraging responsible conduct on the part of their users, so that there might be an opportunity that we can support them in that task. So to kind of support my engagement activities with the company, I submitted an engagement facilitation fund application, which allowed me to kind of be in some way to be a double agent. So I delivered the whole series of activities, engagement activities, where they had two goals. One was that I was trying to support the company in ensuring that people who will be organizing sessions for older people and people who will be attending these sessions will be acting responsibly. But at the same time, I was trying to validate and pilot the idea of offering this sort of sessions as a business idea, basically. So some of the things that while engaging within that I developed is, so we developed this prototype of customer governance training workshop, then fillable templates, and also customer governance cards, just some sort of facilitation tools that companies can use when they think about, okay, so we have a marketplace, we have to make sure that people will be acting in a acceptable, responsible, trustworthy way. So what are the options? What would be the best tools to ensure that sort of behavior? And these cards could be used to facilitate thinking about this sort of challenges. So the outcome of the engagement activity was that the company, so the startup, prepared the community standards. They identified different types of misbehaviors that can occur in their contexts, and they also had an idea how they can manage each of these type of misbehaviors. I was asked to serve on a research-related advisory board, and at the end, I also ended this engagement activity with basically a validation of the workshop offering, both from the perspective of the content and from the perspective of the process. While I felt that this was an impactful activity, not everyone agreed. So meanwhile, we got a lovely letter from the journal where we submitted this paper to, and they said that, so the reviewers advised against publication, which is okay, but I was slightly shocked to see that a reviewer too had huge concerns that this research does not have managerial relevance. So while I was super proud of all the impact that I felt I was doing out there in the field, there was a reviewer saying to me that this research is basically worthless and doesn't have any impact. As helpful, of course, as reviewers' comments were in the experience, were in revising this paper, actually the most revisions and how we actually managed to strengthen the paper was by using the feedback that we got from engaging with the knowledge partner. So the knowledge partner, for instance, suggested anything from that maybe we shouldn't talk about consumer governance because they don't understand what we mean by that, but we should talk about user governance, which was a very simple step, very simple thing. funding, but it changes the whole positioning of the research. So while also engaging with this company, we realized that actually it's very, very important, similar as John said before, that the people are involved in the design of these governance mechanisms, which led me then to a plethora of associated projects. Anything from, so we submitted an application for user involvement in design of digital products. While preparing that application, I discovered the methodology of design thinking, which makes sure that basically users are always involved in the design of the solutions, that we always start with their problem in mind. And this then led to starting a consultancy project on both user involvement and design thinking, and to many, many other activities more. So to wrap up, while engaging in knowledge exchange, I learned in some way to embrace the serendipity. And by serendipity, so we're talking about this occurrence and development of event by chance in a happy or beneficial way. It's not just about the good luck that come by accident. Serendipity is actually an ability to be open to a world of opportunities. And while it's great that we have a plan of, how we will create an impact, and we create this template at the beginning, okay, we have research, what's the kind of sort of impact now we can do, I think that knowledge exchange opportunities can and often do arise spontaneously, without a plan or without the intention, and mostly out of the interplay between teaching, research, consultancy, or any other impact. So I would say that, at least for me, it's always the right time to engage in the knowledge exchange activities. That doesn't matter whether you're in early stage or middle stage or later stage. But maybe, I should put it as a disclaimer that when we're doing this serendipitous type of knowledge exchange, you should do it at your own risk. And that's all from me.
Thanks so much, Maya. And we're going to hand over to our final speaker today, Saskia. Maya, I really love the way that you spoke about your journey interweaving your academic with your practice experience. And I think that's unerringly similar to many of our experiences with this, particularly as John put it, why is it always reviewer 2 that says you've got no managerial implications when you know that you have? Saskia, are you able to share your screen?
Yes, you've got a short period to speak, and I'm very aware that we really want to make sure that there's plenty of time for discussion and conversation. So I've taken the notes that I prepared for my 5-minute talk, which started with how this new agenda around enterprise and commercialization had emerged from sort of consecutive government innovation strategies, and how that's been aligned with government priorities over the years, a sense that the government, that the country can make more of their innovation approaches. And I was going to make an argument about how alignment of research councils has focused attention on this. And I was going to talk about how the Aspect project was looking at this and addressing it, and how then universities were kind of embedding findings from that in their own activity, which we're doing ourselves. And in fact, this process and this discussion series is part of that. So I've thrown those notes away. If you want to ask me about that, we'll come back to that in the Q&A. But what I'd like to do is just make 2 points really about the opportunity for developing innovative approaches to supporting impact. And the first, and I think this is really resonating with what all of the 3 speakers have said beforehand, and really tackling some of the challenges that they've come up against. So the first point I'd like to make is that I think it's really important to always start with why. So we want to think about why we're doing this. What is the objective that we want to achieve? Why does it matter to the researcher? Why does it matter to your collaborators? Why does it matter to wider society? And think about what you really want to achieve with that. And then when you've got that understanding, then you want to choose the most appropriate pathways that are going to help you get there. And I love the word serendipity. I love the thinking about serendipity, and the way that Maya talked about it was really, really helpful and really illustrative. But I think probably the most important thing is to have a plan, because researchers, we know, are so overstretched. There is very little time to do this. There's an opportunity for organizations to support researchers to carve that time out in different ways by valuing the work that they do in this area. But in the, I think it's always going to be very important to understand where you want to get to and have a, direction of travel. And very often, I think, particularly in social sciences, there are the traditional and normal pathways to impact, and those are very important. Of course, you're thinking about your policy impacts and perhaps public engagement, or how you influence practice, as we've heard from Kristine. But I think there's an opportunity to look at a fuller spectrum of ways to develop research impact, and think about what are the models for embedding perhaps more enterprising or more commercial routes to impact. And then the second point I'd like to make is about, which is really supporting us, particularly what Kristine was saying, but also what John was saying about how the importance of perhaps thinking about new pathways to sustain and scale up impact. I mean, I work closely with researchers on their impact planning and their impact pathways, and also narrating impact, for example, for case studies. And often we see that a certain amount of impact has been achieved, perhaps with one constituency or one organisation on one body, but the potential is so much greater. So there's an opportunity to meet the potential of impact by using these novel pathways. A second option is that, we know social scientists are fantastic collaborators. They achieve huge amounts of impact through collaboration and through working with non-academic partners in all sorts of scales and all sorts of locations. But sometimes those collaborations reach they originate in a sense of mutual benefit. So researchers get huge benefits from working with non-academic partners. They get new data, they get new insights. The research is hugely enhanced by that sort of collaboration. But often we see that those benefits maybe shift. And as the collaboration goes on, it's the partner who gets more and more benefit out of it. So they're kind of taking, they want more from the researcher. Maybe they want more training or they want more input. But by that time, the researcher has kind of got their research benefit from it. So we need another model to make sure that we can continue to deliver those benefits and continue to deliver that impact. And, that society can benefit to its fullest extent. And so I think sustaining and scaling impact by using some of these more innovative and enterprising or commercial pathways is a real opportunity.
Thanks so much, Saskia. So we now have time for discussion, and I'm going to go to the first question. I'm going to invite Lorna to pose her question.
Thanks, Debbie. Thank you, everyone. I was interested in a question that came from Kristine's presentation, talking about the possibility of rolling out your trauma-informed training by making it a commercial offer. And I just wondered if you could talk to me, or if any of the panel had thoughts about the value of making the training something that's for sale as opposed to offering it for free. Obviously, there are arguments that research might be publicly funded, and this is something I think that might maybe covered in the second conversation session a little more. But what are the arguments for putting it out there to a local council commercially over offering it gratis?
Well, I guess I can only speak to that very particular experience, but I think when I've been approached, they all have training budgets. They all have things that they need to do with those training budgets. And, I've always been sort of err on the side of like, I'll do probably more work than the kind of value, I'm going to do over and above, what they generally end up paying to some degree. Like I'm going to really, make it worth their while, certainly, but they have to meet kind of training targets, right? They have to invest in that way. And I think sometimes that means they are invested. That means senior leadership feels really compelled to make sure their faces on screens or bums in seats, right? That there's an investment there. This is what we're doing. I think the work I've done recently with a couple of police forces, it needed to be a kind of agreed sign-off process, a formal contract at the higher level, because if it had been something else, it wouldn't have really worked or been effective. And it means that then there is a kind of it's not just a one-off training, which we know, particularly with research around trauma and policing, is the opposite of effective. It can be harmful and not helpful, so it needs to be kind of done the right way. I think there's a commitment to like a fidelity of a model or the kind of findings of the research. I think that doesn't mean that nothing's done for free, right? Like I developed several infographics of that for them to kind of share why it wasn't that I was sort of like a miser sitting in the corner hoping we would just bring in lots of money, but it also meant that I could involve some other research colleagues. They were on kind of temporary contracts. We could extend their contracts. We could kind of bring other people in, which felt like the right thing to do because that was their expertise. They're developing their skills. So it's both good for us kind of in-house, but also it meant that, that this was something they were going to do with that budget anyway, I guess. So that's sort of maybe a not very exciting answer, but it's true sometimes.
Thanks, Kristine. And John?
Yeah, so I've got kind of two answers to that as well. I mean, for CPDs, my CPDs normally last continuing professional development, are normally a 2-day affair, and there's a lot of work to create, a lot of work to deliver, and everybody expects that to be a commercial thing. So it's handled through the university consultancy office, and a commercial fee is charged for that. But that's for the industry, the live events industry, the crowd safety industry, and they expect that. But I also do free tasters. I mean, during the lockdown period of the pandemic, I mentioned at the end of my talk that the industry really suffered, right? Because they weren't, they were losing personnel, they were losing money, they were losing skills. I gave tasters to several businesses that I knew around Europe, free. And I've done lots of tasters before. When I work with the fire service at the moment, I do a regular training session for them. It's about an hour, and it's for fire service personnel working in the field of chemical, biological, radiological, and nuclear decontamination. It's about crowd management for those incidents. And for years, we were in touch with the Fire and Rescue Service, and they wanted to work with us and didn't have a budget. Then when they got a budget, it was just to cover travel. And we reasoned, and these days I'm doing it all on Teams, so there's no money involved at all, but we reasoned that we really want to help the Fire and Rescue Service get this psychology into their training. Because if we didn't deliver it, this is me and colleagues from Public Health England, if we didn't deliver it, then it would be either delivered badly or it wouldn't be delivered, and they wouldn't have this, this impact, if you like, this change wouldn't happen for them. So, you just make a judgment that, so it's, it's a cost in your time. And if you, cost everything, then, it's not very efficient. But in the longer run, what do you want to do, really? I really want to help the fire service. And so, I made a judgment that it's absolutely fine. If they haven't got a budget, I will still deliver that training for them.
Thank you, John. Maya.
Yes, so maybe I have more a comment, but it relates of what we were just talking now. So I think that sometimes it seems like that we need to normalize that making profit or generating revenue is a part of making research impact, because sometimes it seems like, that to make research impact, that means that you shouldn't earn any money or generate any profit. It's almost like a profit is a bad word in the context of generating, talking about the impact. So, and this is because, like in the business world, people buy products if they solve their problems, and otherwise people take a lot of things for free, and we don't know whether they will be prepared to pay for them. So similarly in the research impact. So for me, when I see that I get offer that somebody wants to do consultancy with me, that means that that they're prepared to pay for my ideas, pay a fair price. Obviously not that I can buy Lamborghini, not yet, but they are prepared to give something back when they can.
Thanks, Maya. We have another question here from Jessica White, and she'd be interested to know if anyone has had experience with how to communicate effectively with partners. So I think we've got the ideal panel here to talk about their varied experiences.
Hi, great. Thanks for picking up my question. Yeah, it's just really, I made it very simple because I'm sure that everyone has their specific experiences. But really, I think I'm struggling with you know, when I've delivered something that's very kind of simple, like, you know, your excellent PowerPoints that you all did, then they've said, okay, that's too simple. You need to, like, you know, tell us what you would like to do in terms of, you know, the specific research and so on. And then when I delivered that, then it was told that it was too complicated. And so I'm just really interested to hear from all of you how you managed that relationship and how you overcame perhaps roadblocks in that communication.
Thanks, Jessica. John, and then Kristine.
Yeah, this is a bit like the question we're sometimes asked, you know, what's the basic principle? What should you do to start, you know, impact knowledge exchange and so on? And in simple language, simple terms, it's relationship building. It's all about relationship building. It's creating relationships, developing relationships. And so the reason that matters is because if you start to have a relationship with an external partner, external person, then you can listen. Right, you can not only tell them what you're doing, but listen. And when you listen, right, you get a sense of what their discourse is, because each partner will have their own discourse, right? So understand the discourse, understand their landscape, understand their needs, and their needs will be expressed within that discourse, within that conversation. But also there's the question of jargon, right? So we have our jargon, they have their jargon. So it's getting to know their jargon. So I think, you know, that for me is the basic lesson. So and I think, you know, the problem with it is a difficulty is just time and space, right? Because I think how do you do that? Well, here's an example, right? So you want to have a grant application where you have an external partner, you have no connection with those people. What do you do, right? So you might say, oh, can I come and give a presentation? So that sounds a bit formal, but within that, if you can organize the setup so that you can have dialogue and questions, you can have a kind of informal chat with people within that time, and you get a chance to listen. But you've also started the relationship with them, and you can follow it up with emails and conversations and so on. So it will take time, I think, but I think those are the ingredients that I would suggest.
Yeah, absolutely, John. That tallies exactly with my experience. It really is about that, hopefully having that time to build those conversations and engaging with people over a number of separate types of meetings, workshops, etc. I think that really helps to engage people and as John said, understand their needs. Kristine wanted to come in.
Yeah, I was just going to, say I'd give her up another version of that answer, really. And sometimes what I have done is say, you know, kind of from the outset, I'm not going to develop something and then send it to you kind of for email feedback. Can we just meet? I'm going to show you what I have. You're going to tell me in this moment. And why don't you also invite not just the kind of my direct contact, invite who else who's going to deliver this content, who else could just have an informal conversation where I say, this is the word I would use, and, you know, go back and forth a little bit of that. And then sometimes there's a clarifying, you know, they, you know, particularly with disciplines that are outside mine, right? They want to say something I don't think they should say. And so then we get to have that conversation. It's also a bit informal and it's a bit easier and it's saved a lot of energy. So it's part of the relationship building, but also just saying, we're going to do a strategy workshop together. We're going to come up with the content together. You know, I'm going to show you my slide. You tell me it's terrible. I'll change it right on the spot, you know, that kind of things that it is not a waste of time basically, but also is part of the relationship building process.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Kristine. Saskia.
Yes, just to amplify those points really, and stress the importance of being in listening mode when you begin to engage with new partners, particularly, and also, you know, just to do what you can to kind of put yourself in their shoes, mm-hmm. and to empathize with where they're coming from. I do some, you know, research impact communications training, and often we'll even sort of get people to write a pen portrait of their stakeholders, so that you kind of really put yourself in their position and flesh out kind of where they're coming from and try and understand their perspective before you start sort of delivering things that may or may not be in line with what they're looking for.
Thanks, Saskia. And Keith has put a comment in there about learning to engage with different audiences. Jessica.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you so much, everyone. That's wonderful input. And I've taken lots of notes. I just wondered, just a very short follow-on question from that. What happens if they're not giving input at all? Like if you ask for input and they say, well, it's your research, you should know. And I think it might be a cultural thing, but you know, because it's obviously a different culture, but I'm not sure how to deal with that at all. I don't know if anybody has had that where, you know, the input that you're getting is perhaps there's not, you know, the input that you need in order to move forward. Just the last question.
That could stem from a confusion over what input is, or what we mean by input and what our partners mean by input. And Maya's going to come in.
Yeah, so I think management of expectations. So typically during the introductory meetings, when you get to know the client, you realize that some clients just want the final version on the table. They don't really, even though we want to engage with them and have several workshops and co-create things with them, they don't want that. They want that things are delivered to them. And in that case, what I typically do is I show them an examples of what the deliverables look like. So if I say that it will be a workshop, I show them an example of the workshop slides, how long it will be, what will be involved, like what will the cost, and so on. So I think everything comes back to the management of expectations. But sometimes, so when you have some clients, yeah, actually just want the final project. They don't want interaction and engagement.
Yeah, and then to veto the final project. No, I'm just kidding. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thanks, Jessica. Richard had a question, which I thought was interesting, actually picking up, Maya, on your point about design thinking. And he was wondering if other people had experience using design thinking, enabling better integration of user needs.
Yeah, thanks, Debbie. Or also, if not design thinking, then similar kind of more formal processes or theories or sets of tools or ways of kind of grappling with that question. How do you get the right kind of input, as people were just saying, the most useful kind of input to get the most useful benefit out of that for the stakeholders and the partners. So just yeah, if anyone has any experience with that, that would be great.
John, and then Saskia.
Well, there is a big literature on co-production. I became aware of this kind of after the event, really. I mean, I kind of muddled through in my way when I tried to co-produce with external partners, not really based on a system. And I've, you know, lately become aware that there is a literature on, you know, key principles that in my area is called co-production, but yeah, I haven't used it formally.
Thanks, John. Saskia.
Yes, also to say that I haven't used design thinking in this environment, but maybe also look at some of the different models for stakeholder mapping, you know, which you build on everything from the sort of very basic power and alignment matrix right through to other sorts of stakeholder mapping that enable you to kind of prioritize which stakeholders to engage with in, you know, in which modes and why. By analysing, you know, where they sit in terms of alignment or interest, or, you know, relevance, authenticity. You know, there are a lot of different stakeholder mapping and engagement strategies which might help with this.
Thanks, Saskia. And I think it's probably going to be our final question, but we have one here about incentivisation, and it's from Francis. How can researchers be incentivized to take on what may be seen as extra work? And I think that's a question in itself. Is knowledge exchange extra work? E.g. external roles relevant to their work? And has this been recognised as part of their 40% research allocation where that applies to your role? And how can consultancy via the university become more accessible? Does anybody want to jump in on that? There's quite a lot of questions wrapped up in that. I suppose the main thread there is incentivisation and how we really view knowledge exchange and enterprise as part of our roles. So we've got Saskia, and then we've got Keith.
Yes, I suppose, you know, obviously I'm a sort of impact practitioner, and I would like to think that impact work is an integral part of research work. So I would, you know, in terms of good practice, I would assume that those two things need to go hand in hand. I think the issue is one for most researchers of risk. because they understand what their obligations are around publication and around grant income and teaching and so on. But engaging in this sort of activity is much more risky because, if you get great outcomes, that's fantastic, and you might be rewarded, and there may be a ref case study on your work and whatever, and the rewards can be great, let alone the intrinsic gratification of having success in this area. But the risks are very great in terms of starting this sort of engagement.
Very well said. Thank you, Saskia. Keith.
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think historically, universities have been very poor at recognising any form of knowledge exchange and enterprise. It just simply in terms of their formal pathways for promotion. But I think times are changing, attitudes are changing. Many universities have got promotion streams all in the enterprise arena, and hopefully, although Sussex doesn't have that at present, it soon will do. I think it's just the question's a good one, because I think just in general, the higher education sector's in a matter of flux on this. And we are moving to a state, I think, where if it doesn't share it wholeheartedly, it has exactly the same recognition as very traditional research in the years to come. But I think there's a sort of direction of travel here, and we're going in just one direction.
Thanks so much, Keith. And I just want to say thank you to everybody. Thank you to our speakers, to everyone who's participated in the conversation. We've got 3 poll questions, so don't go away just yet. We'd really like your feedback. And do take this opportunity to tell us in the chat if there's anything you'd like us to discuss at future sessions, because there are 4 more sessions. And the next one actually is about the commercial routes to social benefit, impact without compromise. So it really does focus on that issue of how enterprise and social sciences fit together, and how they can be very close allies. And we have Paul Harrod and Sally Good from Evidence to Impact, Professor Robert Klassen from the University of York, and Professor Andy Sterling from the University of Sussex Business School speaking on that. And we also have, thank you, Belinda, for putting that in the link to the next session. We also have a podcast series called The Enterprising Researcher, and we have, I think, 6 podcasts in that series, which you can also check out. And I think that we can put the link in the chat for that too. There's a poll. So please do complete the poll, and we really hope that you can join us on the next at our next session. Thank you, everybody.